launching airstrikes, these Tomahawk cruise missiles. I want to go to Jeff Zeleny, senior White House correspondent. Jeff, you're there down at Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida, with the president. Tell us what you're hearing, what you're seeing. It didn't take long for the president to speak out.
It didn't indeed, Wolf, and this is really a swift-moving series of events here. And we have, I just came from a briefing just a short time ago with the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, and the National Security Advisor, General H.R. McMaster, and they walked us through sort of the president's thinking and what led to him making this decision this evening. Now, of course, the chemical attacks just happened a couple days ago, and we have been talking and reporting about how the president said he was moved by those attacks, those gruesome images. So his advisors said he ordered up some options at that moment, but it wasn't until this afternoon when he arrived here in Florida that he sat down with his national security advisors to sort of go through those options, and he ultimately made that decision, and those strikes began around 8:40 or so Eastern time. But there was some interesting reporting as well from the Secretary of State about Russia. Did the president give Russia, Moscow, a heads up that this was coming, of course? And the Secretary of State, Wolf, said this. He said, "We sought no approval from Moscow or any other level within the Russian infrastructure." However, the U.S. Forces on the ground did make contact with Russian ground forces who work out of similar military bases and other things, who work in close proximity. It's through the general channels of deconfliction to try and alleviate any Russian casualties. But the Secretary of State very clear, saying again and then re-emphasizing that they sought no approval or did not inform Moscow of this going forward. And Wolf, one other thing, General H.R. McMaster, the National Security Advisor, he was also giving this briefing this evening just a short time ago. And he said that this was a very limited strike indeed, specifically, as Barbara was reporting, in retaliation for that chemical attack earlier in this week. He said this should not be viewed as a change of U.S. policy towards Syria necessarily. He went on to say this. He said this was not a small strike. This was not a small strike. I think what this does is communicate it's a big shift in Assad's calculus. It should be anyway. And then the Secretary of State also made clear that they sought the approval from several international leaders, and they, essentially gave a warning that the U.S. was indeed going to do this. Now, we know the president has been critical. In fact, in 2013, as a private citizen, he said that President Obama would have to seek congressional approval before doing any action in Syria. Well, this president did not seek congressional approval, and we'll see how that plays out in the coming days. But, Wolf, we are being told that the White House contacted some 24 members and also working his channels back in the White House here. So this was not, as Barbara was also reporting, not a secret mission. They wanted folks to know. Now, of course, how this impacts the president's summit here with the Chinese president, certainly interesting, but it does show the White House belief North Korea, Wolf.
And Jeff, it didn't take very long for the president himself to go out and speak to reporters before the cameras. Let me play exactly what the president had to say. Listen.
On Tuesday, Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad launched a horrible chemical weapons attack on innocent civilians. Using a deadly nerve agent, Assad choked out the lives of helpless men, women, and children. It was a slow and brutal death were cruelly murdered in this very barbaric attack. No child of God should ever suffer such horror. Tonight I ordered a targeted military strike on the airfield in Syria from where the chemical attack was launched. It is in this vital national security interest of the United States to prevent and deter the spread and use of deadly chemical weapons. There can be no dispute that Syria used banned chemical weapons, violated its obligations under the Chemical Weapons Convention, and ignored the urging of the UN Security Council. Years of previous attempts at changing Assad's behavior have all failed,